Hi, I'm Caroline Heredia. I'm a composer, violinist, and interdisciplinary artist. I work with both acoustic and electronic mediums, as well as audiovisual and interdisciplinary projects. I love working in collaboration with other minds, other artists, or experts from other fields. Creation in collaboration is, to me, an exercise on humility, solidarity, and a profound form of human connection. Today, I want to talk about how I think about composition and how it is intertwined with my life, my way of thinking, and my way of relating to people and the world around me. Composition is, to me, a way of knowing. I think knowledge can be created through different channels, and language is one of them, as in naming things implies to at least recognize them and apply them to a category. For example, I'm speaking in a second language right now, which means I only have partial access to this system of reality. Not only I don't know all the words, but sometimes I lack context that is gained through experiential knowledge. I may not always grasp the full extent of a word or a phrase or an expression, and my English is partially experiential because I've lived for the last 17 years in the USA. But I learned it mostly intellectually, as my formative years were experienced in Argentinian Spanish. What speaking a second language fluently has taught me is that each system of reality, informed by the cultural, the historical, the social, the political, the geographical, it's not fully translatable into another. One interesting phenomenon to notice this immediately is when I find feelings that don't have a word in one or the other language. Does that mean that feeling doesn't exist in the other system? Or perhaps that it's not as important in this other system as to be given a word? And how much does that say about each culture? Now, at 45, I have also noticed my body stores plenty sensorial knowledge that can understand or predict situations I'm not fully able to put into words. I think of music as this as well, a system of reality that is not fully translatable to words. Still, a kind of language I have spoken since I was very young, one of my mother languages, that allows me to process and understand the external world and the world inside me. I came to understand very late in my life that I'm neurodivergent, and part of that experience makes the concept of purpose an essential question in everything I do. When I create music, I must find a purpose, not to create a literal translation of a narrative with sounds, although a lot of interesting ideas could come up from the impossibility of literal translation into sound, but so that I can align this act of creation with ethical concerns, with a sense of responsibility, and using this form of communication with others. Words have power over others, and so does music. I have worked with chamber music extensively throughout my career, and that has allowed me the possibility of deep interactions with the ensembles or individual artists commissioning me. I enjoy that very much First, because it gives them a chance to know me and me a chance to know them at a level that isn't always possible with larger ensembles and with all the admin apparatus in between. And because I'm working with human beings and because I don't always know them from before, I like to take that first time to get to know each other personally, understanding that all of that personal dimension will be imprinted in the performance, in the process of the creation, in the communication we're going to have, and also in the afterlife of the work. It allows me to get a sense of the musician's internal words and of how we can find common ground to serve an idea that we want to communicate to the audience. The more understanding we can find in that process previous to the actual composition, especially when working with people I don't know from before, the richer the experience and the more satisfying for everybody. I like to be very present and available at that point. While I'm composing, I become very interested in their preferences, their decisions, their strengths, their desires, and the things they don't like too. Not so that I completely modify myself to please them, but it does allow me to find that common ground and also to let myself be transformed by this experience. Composition connects me with the feelings I feel for others, a capacity that I think a lot of composers have, this extreme empathy, and also on call, because composing can take long periods of time, and because I do work with feelings in my music, I must be able to retain a certain feeling in my mind and heart. Sometimes, as months pass, I have to call the feeling to ensure I'm staying on track with the tone or narrative of the music, which could take its own path, right? Because music also has a grammar, which is determined by tradition or in opposition to tradition in a specific genre, style, or practice. So if you know the system well, you could predict it. And as a composer, this means you could run on autopilot. Of course, at many times in my compositional process, I do need to turn on my intellectual mind when I'm running into technical matters that require intentional decisions based on my knowledge in logistics, notation, or acoustics, for example. I wrote Using Velo dedicated to dear friends of mine who were severely affected by the situation that had started unfolding in Venezuela in 2014. By then, there were massive protests that were reprimanded violently. Death and devastation was taking their people in the name of justice, of protection against external abusive power. It was an extremely sad situation, and it connected me with the impotence I feel for so many Latin American countries who, in the search for freedom, have fallen into internal wars, making it so hard to find stability, to find peace, and the space to be carefree, to be happy. But how do I communicate Latin American suffering and injustice in an environment that isn't always aware of the role it may have in it? Without feeding the prejudices many hold against Latin Americans, that by default people are lazy, messy, corrupt, how do I communicate all the beauty inherent in living a slower life, in living with less material needs, in having strong and robust networks of human connection, and with the motherland, in trust in intuition and improvisation sometimes, the beauty of the imperfect, of the not produced, the raw, the natural. When I composed that piece, I was deeply moved by the situation. It felt like the most appropriate thing to do. I thought it could bring attention to it, that people might become interested in reading more and understanding what was really happening to a neighboring country. But later on, other feelings arrived. I'd started considering that so many people in the USA may never be able to feel true compassion for Latin Americans, whatever this bunch of people are, right? Was it useful to add program notes? Should I just let people experience the sounds? Would the sounds alone carry all or any of that meaning? Ausencias was composed in 2016 in a period where I was exploring the concept of death. My personal need was to understand and process that mortality is unstoppable, unpredictable, unavoidable. I think of death and also of life as things we don't fully understand. We either don't understand why we're here or why we leave, and we don't know when either. So that is one of the greatest mysteries that a lot of people can go around and live with, but my mind can't. And so, again, composition is my way of knowing. Through this piece, and at least one more that I wrote about this, I sat with that feeling. I sat with the thought and I investigated the lives of 3 Latin American artists from the 20th century who were all women and who took their own lives. I researched their lives and their last moments, the last works that describe their state of mind, the factors that may have led to their decisions, and to be able to override the most primal instinct humans have, the survival instinct, the ethical problem of self-extermination. Is it a rightful decision? And for those who stay, how do we move on from losing somebody like that? And for our own lives, how do we go on, or how do we live our lives knowing we can lose everything at any point? I have been concerned about whether I wanted to share this with others, just considering all of that is taboo for some, and many may even reject the existence of works exploring this for fear. But not talking about human matters has never been helpful for anybody. Quite the opposite. Research shows the more we can talk about this openly, especially with those who care about us, the more we can reestablish that connection that we may have lost and find the love and joy that exists in life and that every person needs to make it all make sense. Humans need each other. Let's not allow ourselves to leave anybody feeling they have to carry their burden alone. Let's allow ourselves to talk about certain things and to attune to the suffering of others so that we can see it and possibly help relieve it. Every single act of solidarity and sincere love counts, but more if we're able to give up something that only benefits us for the well-being of the other. That's true love, I think. For the next year, I developed an intermediate version of this work. The ensemble played live on one side with a set of lights, and on the other side there was an area for the dancers, 3 dancers each interpreting one of the artists, illuminated from overhead by a projector with visual effects. And at the same time, an infrared camera was tracking their motion, so some of the effects were triggered by their movements. It could capture movement in the dark and produce these very organic shadows and colors following the dancers. A second camera filmed them from overhead, and that video was projected onto another screen at the back of the stage. So there were 3 different areas providing a perspective of the same piece. I was using extra musical elements to create a poetic version of the piece, a metaphor for how the same situation can be perceived in completely different ways. In the context of the piece, it was about being able to see the other, to acknowledge their suffering, regardless of one's own different perspective of what it is or what it should be, and to take action, to get close, not away. Pruning from 2021 was composed for the dual axis, and it's a piece where I started experimenting with form. I wanted to describe my experiences with meditation while I was learning and practicing it. Pruning refers to the pruning of neural systems, a capacity our brain has, and that it's used particularly when learning new things. It is essential in our early years of life, and it defines automatic paths for responses we could carry for the rest of our lives. We know now that we maintain this capacity later in life. It is possible to prune some of the automatic paths our brain has created throughout the years and our experiences to, in some way, make space to creating new neural paths, habitual responses that have proven unhelpful or hurtful for us or for others can be changed. But first, they need to be identified and then intentionally redirected towards healthier and more loving ways of being. This piece was an attempt to translate that mental experience into sounds. I didn't use a methodical approach, quite the opposite. Is with meditation, I first found silence and I let the sounds come to me. As a beginning meditator, repetition and starting over when getting lost in thoughts were a big part of the process, and I used those musical devices in the work as well. There is no linear development. There are several tries, each getting further and further, sometimes fighting an agitated mind until reaching a state of peace, where we can see things for what they are, where decisions are much simpler, and where one feels full of love, and that makes everything so much lighter. In 2018, I composed a piece in collaboration with visual artist Katina Vitsikas, commissioned by Bird and Vibes, called Disjointed Fragments. It talks about my identity breaking. I was having a hard time fitting into a space that was not fitting for me and trying to understand what my identity was, particularly the Argentinian part. Argentinians, well, we're over 40 million people, right? But we may have some things in common. And one of them has been identified as intensity. Intensity in our feelings, intensity in our relationships, intensity in the way we communicate. The social life in Argentina is very rich. Family, friends, neighbors, and colleagues in general are very close. There is a tendency to be frank and direct, with an accent and tone that could be interpreted as a little dramatic. For this piece, I used an excerpt from an Argentinian football commentator, Victor Hugo Morales. The commentator describes the goal that Maradona scored against England in the 1986 World Cup, a few years after we had gone through the Falklands War. A devastating time from Argentina, when not only we had a de facto government supported by the USA enforcing terrorism of state, but we had also lost so many young lives in this war with England, fighting for a piece of land and its natural resources. The World Cup that followed carried that extra meaning. So when Maradona scored against England, eliminating them from the World Cup, there was an enormous emotion in that goal, the commentator said. I included that excerpt in the electronic part. My incredible collaborator, Katina Vitsikas, created a ball of energy, a light, intense and flickering, with the dancer behind a transparent screen also shaking as if her body had been completely taken by so much emotion. That emotion we carry inside is so big, so overwhelming, but can be so beautiful too. Resonancia Natural exists because the Santa Cruz River watershed in southern Arizona exists. It is a desert ecosystem that has been profoundly altered since colonial settlement. The perennial water flows that once sustained life in the region have been drastically reduced by urban development, mining, aquifer depletion, and now the climate crisis. Oboist Sarah Fraker and clarinetist Jackie Glacier initiated a broader project called Watershed Soundscape. It was a project that brought together scientists, hydrologists, ecologists, musicians, visual artists, educators, and indigenous communities, specifically the Tohono O'odham Nation, which has inhabited the territory since time immemorial. The question driving the project was, can art help a community understand, feel, and defend the ecological health of its own watershed? The work is structured in 3 time frames: past, present, and future. The past evokes a time of deeper connection with the land before colonial disruption. The present is the time of that very disruption, of the assault on the ecosystem. And the future is neither a utopia nor a dystopia. It is the possibility of a realization, the realization that we are interconnected with that system. Thank you for sharing this time with me. It's been a privilege to be part of this series, and thank you so much to Composers Now for the invitation.